Hey guys, it's Alex Serpentine here. I'm making a new video about my reading list from this last year, 2024, now that it's 2025. So I just wanted to reflect back on some of my favorite books that I read in 2024 and talk a little bit about each one so you guys know what was on my reading list from this last year. And then you can go ahead and read the books yourself. You find it to be interesting. So let's get into it. So a couple of the books I read at the beginning of the year were on um was some of Austin Kleon's books. He wrote this book, Steal Like an Artist. That was his first book. But he has these two other ones, which is Show Your Work and Keep Going, which I'll show on the other page too. Really great books to help with your creativity. Like he gives good tips on how to present your work online or to build your kind of like your backlog of work and to continue going forward with making stuff. So he gives a lot of good tips in here. It says the subtitle for this is 10 ways to share your creativity and get discovered. So one thing I remember he was talking about that in that book was, it takes a while to get your stuff like discovered, right? But the thing that you really need to pay attention to is being faithful to what you really want to do, not try to sell out, not try to do what you think other people want you to do, but to be true to your actual work the whole time. And just be continually adding new stuff to whatever you're working on, so you're building it up. And eventually some communities will find you, and it doesn't really matter in the end how many people are following you or find your work. But it could start off where you have like really hardcore fans, and that's like you have like a little kind of underground network. But then as you keep on going, like you'll get more footing, and your work will just grow. So he gives good tips to how to set up your work in a way that makes it available to people, and gives you tips on how to approach that in general. It's a really good book. Read Still Like an Artist also, and this is his other one I was just talking about. Keep Going, like 10 ways to stay creative in good times and bad. So it's more motivation and way to look at things that keeps you going towards your goals and creating what you want to create and what you want to contribute to the world. One of the main things it was talking about in this book is that every day is Groundhog Day. So it's actually like every day is repeated over and over. We have the same structure. The day starts, the day ends, and we go through the same basic structure over and over. So might as well get used to building a certain way of approaching your day that gives room for your creativity and your creative projects, so you can continue moving forward. So yeah, Austin Kleon's books are so fucking awesome. I love them so much. It's really changed my way of looking at things in terms of my creativity. So I would check out all three of his books: Steal Like an Artist, Show Your Work, and Keep Going. I'll put the links in the description of this video for all these books. So I also read some Michael Teachings related books because I was making some videos on Michael Teachings this year. Michael Teachings is a system that's like it's a channeled system that talks about our soul evolution through lives and the different roles and different characteristics we take on for each life. One of the main things from that is the dragons or obstacles, they're called in the Michael Teachings, which are the fear patterns that we take on for each life, which are uh, difficult patterns that we have to feel through and work through that are kind of like wounds in a way, or they affect us in different ways. So there's 7 different ones. There's self-destruction, self-deprecation, stubbornness, arrogance, martyrdom, impatience, and greed. I think that was all of them. Anyway, yeah, so they're uh they're very difficult patterns, but when you learn to overcome them, it can really transform your life. Like for me, I have so the book anyway is called Transforming Your Dragons: How to Turn Fear Patterns into Personal Power by Jose Stevens. This is the best book I found on the dragons or obstacles. So I learned a lot about my own dragons or obstacles, which are arrogance and self-destruction. So arrogance is like a fear of vulnerability. So I've been learning how, by following what's in this book, learning how to be more comfortable with my vulnerability. And then self-destruction is a fear of like that you're out of control and that you can't control your life. And so it's like dealing with those feelings and proving to yourself that you can actually make forward movement in little steps and not overwhelming yourself with too much structure or too much or going into a lack of structure. So those are 2 examples for me from what I learned, but there's 7 of them in the book. And they're really good to know because they're like the core fear patterns that we all experience. So awesome book right there by Jose Stevens. Then I also read this book by Elizabeth Puttick. It's called 7 Personality Types. And this helped me get some more background on the roles, some more details about the roles in Michael teachings, which are the soul types. There's 7 soul types. Like it says on this cover, there's warrior, server, artisan, scholar, sage, priest, and king. So those are the 7 roles. And I talk a lot about Michael teachings on my channel, so you can go check out my other playlists and stuff to learn more about these roles, because I made a video on each of these roles. Same thing with the obstacles or the dragons. I made a video on each of the dragons this year. So you can check out these books, really good books on getting into more of the details about the Michael teachings. This one's all about the roles, so check that one out. This is another book I read. That's a Michael teachings book, The World According to Michael, An Old Soul's Guide to the Universe. It's by Joya Pope. This is another Michael teachings teacher, and she just wrote a book where she wanted to cover the whole system and talk a little bit about different aspects of it. So there's some extra interesting information in this book. That's a fun read. Like one detail I remember was like stuff like the servers are actually all in China. That's something I remember from the book. Not all, but like mostly, like 50% of the population in China is made of server souls. So they're not as like popular in the US. They more gravitate towards what's happening in China. If you're a server soul, it's more interesting to them because it's all service oriented. But then there's other stuff that's talking about like what populations or what countries are in different soul ages, where certain roles are more popular, different stuff like that. It's a really cool book. I really liked it, so I'd recommend checking that one out if you're interested in Michael teachings. I've also been looking a little bit more into Myers-Briggs this year. Took a break from it for a while and then came back to it, and like I've been seeing how important it is to understand the functions and the function stack, the cognitive functions that each of the types have. So like if you learn the personality code, like let's say INFP, you can learn that those are actually just a code that denote a certain order of cognitive functions that are engaged with primarily and secondarily and so on and so forth. So for like INFP, the first function is introverted feeling, the second one is extroverted intuition, the third is introverted sensing, and the fourth is extroverted thinking. And so we all have 4 conscious functions, and then we have 4 unconscious functions. And so there's a way, like if you start studying this stuff, especially how Dario Nardi presents it, the guy who wrote this book, you can learn about the cognitive functions and how it relates to each of the types in Myers-Briggs. So, but this book is interesting. It's called Decode Your Personality, Go Beyond Myers-Briggs with 64 Brain-Based Subtypes. So what he did was he analyzed that brains have a wiring, and it creates different subtypes that relate to each of the Myers-Briggs types. So there's 4 different ones there's 4 different subtypes for each Myers-Briggs type. So that creates 64 subtypes. There's dominance, there's harmonizing, there's creative, and there's normalizing. And so each one, so the dominance one is more leadership oriented, being the authority kind of thing. Creative is more the creative element, like very social, but also coming up with a lot of ideas. Harmonizing is good with people. And then the normalizing is more a regular kind of way you'd see it, like a normal brain functioning subtype. So he also goes into the yin and yang style of each function. So like you'll look at INFP, for example, and it's introverted feeling first, right? So we'll talk about introverted feeling, and it'll say there's a yin style, a feminine style, and a yang style, act like masculine style, or they're also known as holistic and analytic. So it's different ways that the energy can flow based on the cognitive functions. So each of the cognitive functions are split into 2 different versions. So basically, there's like, instead of there being 8 cognitive functions, there's like 16 versions of them. So that's really cool too. So it's kind of like an advanced level version of Myers-Briggs that goes even deeper. So it's a really cool thing. If you're into Myers-Briggs, I would check that one out. So this book is No Mind, No Problem. Investigate your mind, relax into pure being, and discover your real self with natural, pure awareness meditation by Ramaji. This is written by an old friend who I used to get consultations with and hang out with. I actually read his book about 10 years ago, this book, and I had a spiritual awakening experience as a result of reading this book. So what's really crazy about this book is that it starts to show you how the mind actually works, and that there's actually no thoughts in it, that there's it's like an open space in your mind that's always present. And if you identify it, if you find it, it basically lets go of your whole fixation and being stuck in thought. And when I realized this for myself, there's like a void behind my thoughts that like sucked in all my thoughts. And then I was just in this no mind state. And since then my mind has felt like it was just wide open, like as if it didn't have any thoughts in it, but the experience of thoughts is different now, where they feel transparent and they're not interfering or sticky or imposing. So there's the overcome by this feeling of space everywhere. So I think to really get the use of this book, you have to be at the right position in your spiritual awakening process. I would say it would be useful and easier to access this if you're already experiencing the non-doership, where your actions just spontaneously arise, and you're very actively aware of that fact that your actions just spontaneously arise and you're not in control of them. I think you kind of need to be at that kind of space, because when you're there, your mind is slow enough. The thoughts are moving slow enough where you can investigate and see the space in between thoughts, and that's the key to unlocking this realization. So this is like a final stage, getting ready to awaken in terms of the mind's realized state, and going to open crown chakra and having energy flow in, and having this be in a no mind state. So this is one of my favorite books because it was so important to me in my own awakening. So I revisited it this year after 10 years of not reading it, and it's still so good. So I definitely recommend checking that out, especially if you're interested in spiritual awakening in different ways. So what's really cool this year that I ran into was Kieran LaGrice's work. He's he's like the chair of the program in at Pacifica. It's a Jungian and Archetypal Studies program. He's the chair of that program. He's a professor in a lot of the classes. I'm looking into doing that for my PhD potentially. Right, I'm just starting school in my master's in consciousness psychology and transformation at National University, but I'm thinking that maybe at some point I'll go to school at Pacifica under his program, the Jungian Archetypal Studies program, and get to meet him and take his classes, because he's just so awesome. This stuff is so cool. This is one of his books that is one of my favorite books from him, The Rebirth of the Hero, Mythology as a Guide to Spiritual Transformation. So in this book, he looks at kind of the whole hero's journey that Joseph Campbell presents, and he analyzes that and brings it into the context of how our lives are related to mythology and how we go through spiritual transformations in through looking at our lives in a mythological lens. Like we are the hero, and what's the hero go through? Like, what are the stages that the hero goes through in the spiritual transformation and evolution and open and waking up and go moving towards your purpose in this life and all that. So it gives you kind of a guide breakdown of here's all the stages that you might go through in your journey in this life, in your awakening, and your purpose. So that's a really cool book. I feel like it's a much more accessible guide to what like The Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. Like what that book is trying to teach, this book makes it really accessible. So I would definitely check out this book by Kieran. This is another book I read by Kieran. It was just more about his experience with his own awakening and transformations that he went through. A lot of it was surrounding difficult experiences. He's having difficult emotions and energies that he was struggling with. He talks about alchemy, which is what Carl Jung talks about, which are different stages of inner spiritual transformation that we go through. So he highlights his own stages that he went through alchemy, and gives examples of how alchemy, the stages of alchemy work in the context of his own experience. So that's a pretty cool book to check out. This one is called Archetypal Reflections, Insights and Ideas from Jungian Psychology. This is some more stuff that based on Kieran's philosophy, looking at Jungian psychology and depth psychology, mythological studies, different stuff like that. The content in this book is based on the responses that he wrote to his students in his classes. So this is some extra stuff that he wrote that he wants to provide as a book to everybody. So it's a good extra guide to a lot of the stuff that he teaches about archetypes and Jungian psychology and stuff like that. So definitely check out that one too. This one is by artist, another professor, an artist, I think, Maria Antonia Wood. She also works at Pacifica. She's also a professor at Pacifica. So her book is called The Archetypal Artist, Reimagining Creativity and the Call to Create. And this book is really cool because it basically talks about how the artists are the modern day shamans and how important being an artist is in your role to being a healer and a teacher and a shaman, the one that heals and guides people forward, because you can provide the new vision for everything. You can provide new myths. You basically, the role of the artist is the quintessential role that we can play, that can introduce people and heal people and introduce them to new myths. It's basically like art is one of the most important things that we can engage with in our own spirituality, on a deep level. I've been realizing more of this through the books I've been reading, including this book, how closely it's tied to spirituality and our unconscious and the myths and everything that we're tied to. And so all artists are paving the new way for new generations to step into new ways of looking at things, understanding things, experiencing emotions, healing themselves, all that. And so that's a really interesting book that explores all of that and how an artist plays that archetypal role as the shaman. Okay, so this is a really special book that I read at the beginning of this year by Debbie Ford. It's called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. I've been looking into a lot of shadow work recently, and her book is probably the best one that I found and that I've read on the shadow work in general. She gives like um, really good work, like exercises in each chapter that you can do. Like you can write about the things uh, like what are the things that I don't want to be, and what are the things I want to be, things like that. So basically, it's highlighting the aspects of ourselves that we're not willing to look at, and the things that are more in the shadow for us. Like, let's say I don't want to be a killer or a rapist or something like that, right? So then you could have a shadow related to that energy because you really don't want to be those things, you know. But then there's a need to go heal those areas because you could be cutting off you from certain aspects of your power or your creativity or different aspects of your energy. because we potentially shut down areas of our, even like our chakras and our energy bodies. She doesn't necessarily talk in those terms, but it's what I realized in my own experience, is that you can have aspects of your energy that are in the shadow because you feel like they're dangerous or bad, or I shouldn't be that, I shouldn't be that way. So it shuts down aspects of yourself. And like the really important thing about shadow work is it heals you and restores you to wholeness and gives you more power and creativity and connection to everything inside you. So it's really important to do shadow work. And there's some cool stuff that she introduced, stuff like the like active imagination, like working with your guides through, like one example was like um being like, imagine that you're getting off of a touring bus and you're holding the hand of some other being. And so imagine you're doing that and you step off, and what is this being? Who is it? Who do they look like? Who are they? What's their energy like? What do they have to tell you? You can do that as an exercise of engaging your active imagination, and it reveals aspects of your unconscious, things that are sitting underneath the surface. So the stuff that you basically, that happens in dreams, but you can do that in the active imagination. So while you're awake, you can be exploring your active imagination, what you're imagining up here, and you can have dialogue with aspects of yourself, like sub-personalities, different aspects of yourself, to heal different parts of yourself. So it's interesting that way to really engage with your creativity and your intuition is to do exercises like that. So this book was so awesome. I feel like everybody should read this book, especially if you want to do shadow work. This is the book to check out. So this is another shadow work book. This is more of an introduction to what the shadow is and how it works. It's called Owning Your Own Shadow, Understanding the Dark Side of the Psyche by Robert Johnson. He's a well-known like Jungian style writer. Talks about depth psychology in a lot of his books. So he's a really great author. There's some other books that he has, like He and She, which talk about the male and female archetypes in general. But this book is all about the shadow. So it's a short little book that lets you learn more about the shadow. So I checked that one out too. Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. I started looking into Carl Jung's work this year really heavily. I haven't gotten super deep into his actual personal works yet, so I started with this book. This is a book he wrote with a lot of other depth psychologists and friends that he had, and he wrote this at the end of his life. It's supposed to be a guide to like his overall teaching. So he talks about symbols and the unconscious and how all that works. It's mainly depth psychology work. So there's different authors in each chapter talking about different aspects of this topic. But it's basically supposed to be an introduction to Carl Jung's work. So I definitely check that out if you haven't read any Carl Jung. This is a really accessible book to get you started. I also read The Sacred and the Profane by Mircea Eliade this year. He's like a religious historian, so he explores and studies all the different religions and how they're related together. This is all about myth, symbol, and ritual, and basically the main concept is that there's a big difference in looking at our life and our even places and the way we frame things in terms of it being sacred or profane. If it's sacred, it gives a deeper dimension to it, and if it's profane, it feels like it's lacking this depth and like a soul. And so there's been the creeping in of the kind of profane look at everything, and he keeps on pointing to that it's necessary and important to look at things through the lens of the sacred. So he talks about some interesting things in terms of how we look at spaces, in terms of it being sacred, and a lot of other stuff. I'm looking forward to reading more of his books. He has a series called The History of Religious Ideas, which is supposed to go into like the whole history of all religions, which is it's probably like 1,400 pages or 2,000 pages overall for the whole thing. Each book is like 500 to 700 pages or something, and there's 3 of them. So I want to check that out probably this next year. Further on, we'll see where I get with my reading. But yeah, Mircea Eliade's an awesome writer about religion and myth and symbol and ritual in general. So I would check out this book first. If you haven't read any Mircea Eliade, read this one first. So I found this book randomly, Under Saturn's Shadow: The Wounding and Healing of Men by James Hollis. I was just at like a used bookstore and I saw it on the shelf and it jumped out to me because I really like Saturn stuff, and I've also been really interested in men's issues in general. And so I read this book, and it basically highlights how men have their own healing that's really necessary, and different integrations and things that they're lacking in, and that women don't necessarily struggle with in the same way. So men are in need of healing, and their need of what he talks about is like eros, which is the more receptive feminine side, and connection to others and connection to other men, and being able to explore your feelings and your creativity and your art and your emotions and stuff like that, and how important that is, and how it's really lacking in the experience for men in general. So the author wasn't so hopeful that men will be able to figure out the issues that we currently have, but this is kind of highlighting what the current issues are with men in terms of their wounding. And it's like we're carrying like this heavy burden of basically our whole past, like as a human race. It's like in our energy bodies, all the trauma and like abuse and like feeling like there's even feelings of being bad, like for doing all these bad stuff that we did as men throughout history, all the things that men did that were bad, and you carry all that, the weight of all that in you, and then there's no like easy space to like heal that, and so it's really difficult. So this is talking about that a lot in this book, different issues really surrounding that, looking at the archetype of Saturn mainly, who's kind of like the one that's bearing responsibility and the weight of things, and feeling that you need to be structured and disciplined and work hard, but then you also have to learn how to be sensitive and feel your emotions and stuff like that. So it was a really interesting book. If people are interested in men's issues and stuff like that, I would definitely check this one out. And this is a Jungian psychology style book. So if you're into Jungian stuff, this is a really good book. The Soul's Code: In Search of Character and Calling by James Hillman. He's another depth psychology, one of the main teachers. This book is really good, talking about how we each have like a signature in our soul when we come into this life. It's like we have a seed of potential that's going to grow into what we eventually become in our lives. And so we all have like this kind of like code or like aspect of ourselves that's present at the very beginning of our lives, and it starts to bloom and grow throughout the course of our life. And there's a way to discover that and get sensitive to that. And he talks about aspects of that. And so one example that he was talking that I remember from the book is how for parents, when they're raising children, that it's actually good to give them some kind of vision, like to provide them a vision, like, hey, you guys are going to work on this, or you're going to do this. Like you're going to, like, for example, you're going to play chess. You guys are just going to play chess with me. You like, even just giving something for them to do empowers them in a big way, because they can actually pick that up and run with it, or they can react to it and find out where they want to really go. But if you don't provide like a structure and you say, hey, well, you can just do whatever you want, but you don't provide them anything to focus on and work on, it makes it a lot harder to like to get in touch with themselves and find the motivation for what they're here to do. So that's one example they're talking about when you're raising children, and how they're going to grow from being this acorn to the full oak tree. Like it's actually good to give them some kind of structure or something to bounce off against to find themselves. So yeah, it's just a really cool book that talks about like how we actually have souls. Like it's not common in psychology where they recognize the soul dimension of things, and that our soul has a signature to it, and that it grows and expresses itself across the course of our lives. So that's what this book is about, and I would say it's one of the key ones to read if you're looking into depth psychology. So this is the last Kieran the Grice book I wanted to talk about. I was talking about these other ones earlier. Um, I paired this with the next book that I'm going to talk about. This one's called The Archetypal Cosmos. This is like his first book, and it's rediscovering the gods in myth, science, and astrology. It's actually looking at astrology through the lens of archetypes and myths. And so there's some growing evidence that people have done research about astrology and how these archetypes actually affect us on a global level, and I'll talk about that in a second. But this book breaks into the different archetypes of the planets and explains how myth can apply to us individually and how astrology can apply to us as representing basically like he talks about how the solar system is actually organized in a way like it's got the main psyche elements of the psyche from what's the closest to the sun outwards. It's like the main building blocks of the psyche as in terms of what all the planets are representing energy wise and archetypally basically. So it's basically highlighting that astrology represents all these archetypes that are interacting with each other and creating certain energetic signatures. And so basically we are each embedded with that signature of what the state of the cosmos was in when we were born. And so we're carrying the whole whatever the tensions or interactions or kind of energies and signatures of the solar system are, and from an archetypal perspective, those are embedded in us when we're born, and we carry that throughout our lives. So I've been noticing this more and more as I've been studying Vedic astrology, especially with the outer planets. I've been seeing so many themes that are relevant to each person that I've been looking at. So I've been gone back and forth on astrology, and I took a break kind of recently, and then I went back into it. Um, Especially after reading this book, I was like, oh man, maybe there's some more I have to look at with this astrology stuff. So super interesting. I would definitely, if you want to look at uh, astrology through a Jungian archetypal lens, this is the book to check out. And this is the book I'm still working on reading right now, but it's related to the archetypal cosmos. It came before it. It's by Richard Tarnas. It's called Cosmos and Psyche: Intimations of a New Worldview. And so what this book is all about is showing that the planets actually have energies that affect us, and they're the aspects that they throw in relation to the other outer planets actually influence the kinds of themes of energies and experiences that we have on the planet at different times. So one example is he's analyzing in several chapters the Saturn and Pluto conjunctions and aspects. So when Saturn and Pluto are an opposite from each other in a chart, or when they're conjunct in a chart, or when they're in a square, or things like that, those are deal with kind of limitation and retraction, and also uh, deep like underground kind of like under the surface primal energies. Like that's like Pluto is like that intense energy. And so basically he says that Saturn Pluto times are representations of times where usually there's some kind of evil or some kind of primordial force that needs to be dealt with or snuffed out or addressed. And so all the times when there was an intense Saturn Pluto aspect, that was like World War One, World War Two, the Cold War, 9/11, and even more recently the COVID. And so you can see all those themes, that there's some kind of like big thing that needs to be snuffed out or stopped because there's some intense force that's coming out and affecting everything. And that's kind of the theme of all those things. But he does this for a different planetary combinations like Neptune and Pluto, or Uranus and Pluto. And so this has actually made me start to look more at the outer planets, especially in Vedic astrology charts, because they don't typically look at that in Vedic astrology because that wasn't part of the original teaching. But it makes me look at like the how Neptune and Pluto and Uranus actually affect our charts and our personalities on a deep level. So I've been noticing a lot of themes with Pluto that are operating in people's lives, especially when they have like Sun conjunct or opposite Pluto, or Moon opposite Pluto, things like that. There's like intense like Plutonian, like intense like smothering, domineering, controlling energy related to that. So there's a super cool book. I'm still reading it, but this has changed my view on astrology. That there's actually it's so much evidence in this book. He connects it to like different events in history and biographies of famous people, and he analyzes all this, looking at the main things that were happening in terms of the astrological aspects over time on the outer planets. Super interesting. And this is the other book that I'm currently reading. It's called Yin Mysticism and the Vesica Piscis, or Pisces, I think. Pisces. It's by Brynja Magnuson. And she wrote and illustrated this book. There's a lot of cool illustrations she did, and the way that she formatted the book is really cool. She also wrote a book about the incarnation crosses from Human Design, and she did it also in a similar illustrated version. But this book is all about the yin style of approaching things. We're so in our culture focused on the yang, which is the forward momentum, focus on goals, move forward, always moving into action. And yin is more of the resting, building up energy, reflective side of things. So that's like a big important aspect that we have to look at, because yin is just one side of the whole experience. And so as a culture, we've been overemphasizing yang, but it's a need to look at the yin and understand that we have yin periods where we need to rest and build up our energy and reflect before we go into action. So it's starting to recognize that there's a natural need for rest and building up our energy and being in this yin style approach to things and really honoring that in ourselves. So it actually goes into the Tao Te Ching a lot as the main teaching from this book, but there's other things it looks into too. But the Tao Te Ching is basically a yin style philosophy. So it gets a lot from that. Also talks about the I Ching a little bit. I'm still reading it, but it's a really cool book. I've been thinking a lot about the yin style energy a lot because I've been seeing how I function myself. And usually I get like in little sprints of energy where I can focus and do a lot of stuff for a while, and then I take a break for a couple days or whatever it is. And so I kind of go from this yin to yang kind of energy. In my Michael teachings chart, I'm mainly yin energy, so I'm 59% female energy, which is on the inside, and 41 male. So I've been like analyzing that and seeing how that affects me being more yin led. And so it's really cool to have more context for what yin is in general. So I would check that book out, especially because a lot of spiritual people have more connection to the yin energy, and so this can highlight things for you that you might not see through the typical yang approach to things. So that's it. That's all the books that I wanted to share from what I read this year. Lots of stuff on spirituality and stuff like the Michael teachings and Jungian depth psychology. I've been reading about a lot of that kind of stuff. This year I'm starting my master's program in consciousness psychology transformation. So a lot of my reading is going to go into what's required in those courses first, and then I'll see what else I want to read in my free time. But I'll be doing one of these videos at the end of each year just to highlight what I read and the different things I learned in the process. So I hope this was useful. I hope you guys liked it. If you like this content, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.